I was just in Washington, D.C. at the Libertarian National Convention. I was doing press there, and I was there for Trump's speech to the convention, trying to convince the libertarians to support him, where he mentioned crypto and things like that, and witnessed him getting booed pretty heavily. And the more important part to me, people chanting "Free Ross" and the mention of Ross Ulbricht. Yeah.
So interesting story that you probably wouldn't know is that my first time I came to Austin, about 7 years ago now, episode 10 of this podcast, and bear in mind we've done 820 of them or something, was to interview Ross Ulbricht's mum.
Wow, good.
And I discovered Bitcoin because of the Silk Road. One of my friends called me and was like, dude, there's this website.
Yeah.
You got to check it out. So I bought Bitcoin. And
that was definitely one of my first interactions, watching other friends make purchases off the Silk Road. And I got my first transaction in 2012. And then went to the Texas Bitcoin conference here in Austin, doing just interviews, and interviewed Vitalik back then, Andreas Antonopoulos, like Charlie Lee with Litecoin, different people who were there. I was just sort of like, I need to learn all about this. And also the following year when Ross got arrested, and then in 2015, I met Lynn, and then I was there at the trial when he was sentenced for the whole time in New York City. So I was there reporting. If you search my name and Ross Ulbricht, you'll see that I was the one who yelled, "Ross is a hero," when they sentenced him, and then they came and dragged me out of the room.
Oh, did they?
But it was difficult to be there to just witness that whole thing. I've spent way less time behind bars in my younger life, so I definitely understand what that's like. And to be there, getting to know Lynn, getting to know the family, and to more importantly see like how Ross was screwed over. I mean, there's so much that when people, even this weekend, right now, Ross's name is trending, which is a beautiful thing. Silk Road, all this is getting attention again because of the libertarians pushing Trump to make this kind of concession and saying he'll commute his sentence. But still, there's lots of propaganda about Ross, like the accusations of murder for hire stuff, he's just a drug dealer, kingpin, et cetera, which is, the labels they put on him, and things like that. So it's unfortunate to see some of that, but overall, it felt good to go be there, to witness what I think is going to be looked back on as a historic moment, not only in terms of American politics and, the first time a president from another party comes to speak at a different party, and then the reaction, of course, but in Ross's story, I think it's going to be a historic moment. Yeah,
I mean, it's deserved. I've followed it. I mean, like I said, I was introduced to Bitcoin because of the Silk Road, but I also did a bit of the work in the research. I read everything from the Drug Policy Alliance that they said, the Silk Road it reduced violence from the drugs trade.
Absolutely.
It made the transactions safer. I thought the beautiful thing about it was the reviews. You could order. I mean, look, I was pretty much a junkie at the time. I had a cocaine problem. Sorry, Dad. But the good thing about it is that you could order the results in terms of like best reviewed. So
exactly.
You're getting a better product. Like everything about it fixed all the problems of the black market.
And the even more messed up thing about it, like since Ross has been locked up going on 12 years now. And in the United States, there's the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, huge role in not just in the U.S., but around the world, the OxyContin, like the heroin, the opiate epidemic. And to see those people continue to go free and face nothing, but then Ross, who didn't sell the drugs, but just ran the website, all the things that are wrong with it are even more disturbing today, like, to see it happening, continuing to happen.
I mean, they're the Oxy kingpins.
Yeah, exactly. And so, into that point, so as you were saying with the rating system, this is something I've been arguing with people on Twitter about, people saying, well, he's promoting drugs, and people might not like that, but people are going to use drugs one way or the other.
Of course.
But now we're in a situation where, say, somebody wants to go out and party and they do a little cocaine, but they end up overdosing because there was fentanyl in that, because the drug dealer, at the Silk Road, there was drug testing, there was purity, there were reviews and things like that. It was, as some people have said, the Amazon of the, the dark web. That did give people more information. And of course, like in a marketplace, like you need as much information as possible so people can make informed decisions. And if you don't have an option like that, well, you're going to buy it from the guy at the club or somebody you met through a friend of a friend of a friend. And I unfortunately can name more than 5 people I know who've died of opiate-related overdoses in the last 7-8 years, including my father. So I definitely understand how badly that has impacted people. And that's just another more infuriating angle of Ross's persecution. The drug war continues while, whether the government liked it or not, what he provided for, not only was it promoting Bitcoin and as an alternative to the state system, but it was giving people an option to consume drugs if they choose, if that's their, what they want to do with their own bodies and their own minds, but in a safer manner. And now that is gone.
And the other bit that was lost in the whole Silk Road story was like at the trial, I think 6 families were there giving testimonies because their children maybe had bought from the Silk Road and died. And look, that happens. People take drugs and die. It's the reality. People drive cars stupidly and die. People drink and die. It's just, that is a part of life, and that will continue to happen. What the balance should have been is, how many customers there were. That's the reported deaths. If they were buying from the street, what would the chances of death have been? But the bit that's lost in there is the forums. So when I was using the Silk Road, obviously at first I loved it. I was like, what do you mean I can get Peruvian flake cocaine delivered to my door? Yeah, sign me up. But there came to a point where I knew how to stop. I'd gone too far. I was getting to a place where it wasn't. I wasn't taking drugs for a recreation. It was becoming an addiction. Yeah. And the forums were amazing. So these forums, they helped me to identify my problem, how to solve it, and then I'm sober. I've not taken cocaine in a decade now, and it is what it is. No regrets, no shame about what happened. Well, some shame. But those forums are super useful as well. The Silk Road was objectively net good for society.
Absolutely. I mean, I forgot all about the forums. Thanks for bringing that point up, because that was another way for, again, the community to be there for each other, to get more information. And I used to be addicted to crystal meth 19 years ago. That's what I went to prison for when I was 20 years old. So no shame in that. It happens. It can happen to anybody. This is, I think, another thing that sometimes sort of sickens me in the online reaction I see to people. Like, of course, they've seen the drug lord kingpin these accusations against Ross, and they have this immediate, not only like reaction to him, like, screw him, etc., but then this sort of lack of sympathy towards drug addiction, which can happen to anybody. I mean, people sort of, there are people who are like, oh, that's only the dregs of society, the lower class, whatever you want to say. But, especially with the opiate addiction, these kind of things can happen to anybody. Somebody can go from being just a regular person, next thing they're hooked on Adderall, or they get an injury, then they're taking opiates, then they're shooting heroin. I mean, it does happen. So I think we need to have a lot more awareness and sympathy for that. And back to the Silk Road and the forums and everything, like having a space where people can openly, not in fear of like, oh, if I say this out loud, I'm going to go to prison, or I'm going to be shamed by people. They give me a spot where I can speak anonymously and share my concerns and say, hey, this is what I'm going through, and people can offer advice and resources and things like that. We need more of that, not less of that.
I mean, I've had people try and shame me on Twitter. They'd be like, oh yeah, fuck them. They were like, oh, he's a junkie, whatever. I was like, yeah, I was. And now I'm clean 10 years, and what about it? Would you like, fuck off? Yeah,
if anything, I think those experiences make us like more wise in some ways. I mean, because when I got locked up, I was 20 years old, and I felt like I knew. You think you know something at 20, but then get locked up and be surrounded by people who are like never getting out, and just all meeting all kinds of people, very intelligent, brilliant people who are locked up in the U.S. where we are now. I mean, of course, it's a huge prison country with so many people locked up. But I didn't know anything then, and that was like a sort of growing up experience. But I think because of that, when I got out and got through it at 23, now it's been, going on, it's 19 years since I got arrested, about 14, 15 that I've been on this particular journey. I feel like that just made things easier going forward. It's like, all right, I screwed up really young, got some things figured out, and now I kind of have a little bit more of a better head on my shoulders.
How long were you in jail for?
I did a total of 19 months. So the first year I got locked up at 20, turned 21, and I was there for a year. And you'd think after being taken away from your friends and family for a year, you would figure it out. But I got out, was out for about less than 6, went back for another 3 or 4 months and played that game for a little bit, and then went back in 2008 and got out. I was totally done. It was a weird time to be getting out in that experience as a felon in the United States. Obama was just about to be elected, and I was just starting to, after going through prison, and my drug addiction came from depression and all this, other stuff. So when I got through all that, and I started meditating in prison, working on my spiritual journey, and when I got out, I was starting to wake up to like the world at large and paying attention to politics. I was still, 23, 24, and had never really paid attention, didn't trust the government or anything like that. But it was getting out of there, and now as a felon and having that experience of like, you can't get a job here, you can't get rented here. That experience, I honestly think, set me on the path to later discover Bitcoin, to get into independent journalism and everything, because I got out and I started researching the drug war itself and learning all these facts. And I was like, I was never taught this history of like how this whole thing started. And then,
of course you weren't.
And then starting to question even the idea, like I will say, even though I was a drug addict at the time, and my drug addiction was based on like dealing with young trauma and just not knowing how to process it. And then eventually I found a better way. I still don't think that somebody in my position or your position should have been locked up. Like, they threw me in a cage, and that cage didn't heal me. Like, I chose to use the time to the best I could. Like, all right, I need to figure this out. I come from a family of drug addicts and alcoholics. My dad was in and out of prison. It's like, I know I don't want to do this. So let me figure out, how I'm going to stay out of here. And it took a little while, but you got to make a personal choice. The prison system didn't fix me or help me. It's a horrible place filled with brilliant people who are locked up for all kinds of garbage things, just like Ross, who could be out here doing good things for the world.
Well, this is why I love Lynn so much, because most people focus on Lynn as traveling from conference to conference, doing everything she can to raise awareness of Ross's plight and that he should be freed. But what they don't realize is what she's also been doing, which is campaigning for prison sentencing reform and her fight against the prison guards lobby. Is it the Prison Guards Union who basically constantly lobbying to keep as many people in cages as possible? Because she was the one explaining to me, you go to these towns and the biggest employer is the prison. Yeah. And if you start letting out people who've been put in jail for cannabis possession, there's not going to be as many jobs. And this bullshit system where the Prison Guards Union just lobby for people to be in cages. And she's done that as well. It's this kind of like weirdly beautiful thing for her, in that she's had to go through this horrific thing with her son, but it's kind of invented this other purpose for her life alongside it.
Yeah, she's learned. I've heard that from Lynn as well. Actually, we were just speaking to her this weekend after Ross's name being mentioned. I think it helped open up her eyes and maybe others who are following the case to like, okay, this is a symptom of a much bigger problem, and I think it applies elsewhere, but especially in the U.S. because the drug war has been going for 50 plus years. And so drug prisons are filled with people who are in there for, things that now you can go to the store and buy and, all sorts of crazy things like that. But yeah, what you were talking about there's now an industry around the prison system itself that wants to keep things the way they are, keep status quo because jobs, security, or whatever you want to say. But meanwhile, good people are locked up in prison and rotting away. And I met a lot of those good people, some who figured it out before me and never went back, some who are still in there cycling in and out of prison, and some who are dead, who just didn't make it, didn't figure things out. But there's too many good people like Ross rotting away in prisons that could be out here, especially in the age we are in now, doing great things and really helping invent things or contribute ideas that could take humanity to the next level.
Listen, look, I always take a very honest approach with Ross. He took a massive risk doing what he was doing. Yeah, I agree with it. I agree with the net good. If I was in his shoes and got arrested, I'd expect I'd be facing some tough time. A double life sentence plus 40 years is ridiculous. He should be out by now. But he is obviously a brilliant person. He's very smart. But there's a guy called Mike Novogratz who tweeted once, and it always stuck with me. He tweeted, "Nobody is being served any benefit by keeping this man locked up for his life. The taxpayer's paying money for it. And he is being wasted. He's not going to come out and do Silk Road 2. He's going to come out and do something brilliant.
And even more than just the fact that he's locked away from his potential out here, right? The treatment, like he's been in solitary quite a bit of that time. Like they keep putting him in, like there was the Bitcoin conference a couple years ago where they shared his phone call and that got him in trouble. He got put back in the shoe. I think I just saw him tweet a couple days ago that or like a few weeks ago that he saw the outside for the first time, like a window, and there's he talks about through this thing he can see a bird every now and then, and that's like his key to life. And then I saw him recently saying about I don't know if he's getting religious or just looking for some spiritual connection, but something about going to the ministry in there, being able to have that option. So Ross is, and from what we've heard is he's in there when he has the opportunity, when he's not locked up in solitary, tutoring other people, helping other people still. And to your point about the risk, I think that Ross and the things he's accused of, and of course we should just make it known that Dread Pirate Roberts, we still don't know who all was exactly involved in what, and we know the federal agents were up to some funny business, and so there's a lot of unknowns. But the role that Ross did play and the name Dread Pirate Roberts, what they talked about on the Silk Road was pretty much a continuation. Like that work is what my work is a continuation of. They talked about agorism, and building parallel societies and parallel economies to the state. Like that's something that I wholeheartedly believe in, and absolutely that is a risk. And we're seeing that now with Roger Vere's arrest, with other people's arrests. However you feel about these people who are maybe speaking out, some would say too loudly or too early. I don't know what it is, but the point is there's a risk going on. We're at a point that I think more and more people in the crypto community need to grapple with, that like the state does not want competing currency, whether that's Bitcoin or something else. They don't want people like Ross creating systems where they can't tax and control the marketplace. Sure, eventually we'll legalize drugs once we can tax it and regulate it and have control of it. But the idea of somebody doing that and doing it in a currency where the government can't control is just horrifying to them. And that's what the judge said when I was there in the courtroom. When she sentenced Ross, she said, she had like the US flag behind her. She said something to the effect of like, I'm humbled by the task before me that I have to make this decision, but I'm going to give you this double life sentence plus because I want to send a message that nobody will dare ever take your flag up again. Like she wanted to really, I think.
Judge Bloom?
I think that was her last name. Yeah, it's a woman, I can't recall, but this was at the sentencing. And she essentially was just saying that his philosophy, libertarianism, more specifically agorism, which was promoted on the Silk Road and which Ross separately has also discussed, that was a threat, or a danger. And I think that's for me, not only is like, okay, that's good to know. They don't want us building alternative systems, which I think is more of an answer than politics and stuff like that. That's what I write about in my book. But I think we do have to be aware, like you said, that there are risks. And, the guy who originated the philosophy of agorism warned about that in his books in the 70s, that if we move too fast, the state's going to, clamp down and shut anybody down. We have to like sort of build these new technologies and try to build out new parallel systems as we're educating the masses and trying to get people to realize like that maybe there's a better way, a better alternative. This is something that I really strive for. But if we move too soon, too quick, there's going to be consequences. And unfortunately, Ross is a victim of that state violence, I think.
Yeah, I did an interview yesterday with Ben Carman and Tony from Mutiny Wallet, and they've just built a Bitcoin wallet. And I don't know if you followed the story of the Samurai Wallet guys who've been arrested. And again, look, they provoked an arrest by saying, like, you could use this to evade sanctions and they would profit off it. But either way, it was a meme and they're providing a privacy tool, right? That's all they're doing. They're saying, we as human beings deserve the right for private transactions. We know it's a fundamental pillar of democracy to have private transactions because the government can influence elections if they know what you're spending money on. We all know this bullshit, right? But there's a chilling effect from the Samurai guys being arrested to other wallet developers. Phoenix have moved out of
Wasabi.
the US. Yeah, Wasabi has closed down, essentially closed down. Ibex have left.
Local Monero closed down in the US. I mean, all operations, but I mean, there's these ripples we're seeing.
Yeah, but even these guys, Mutiny, it's just a wallet. It's just a Lightning wallet. I can send you Bitcoin back and forth. I asked them the question, are you worried? And they're like, yeah, of course. We don't know if that's something they're going to come after because they come after a lot. And they get the low-hanging fruit, then they go a bit higher and a bit higher and a bit higher. And so, look, this is a great time to talk to you, Derrick. When Danny told me all about it, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm in. I'm fully in. I want to talk to you about this, and I'm glad you know so much about Ross because Ross has been important. I wrote to him once. He wrote back, and if I could have visited him, I would have visited him. And he will be released. I look forward to it.
I agree.
Yeah, we'll all be there, and I'm really happy for Lynn. But like, I think your book is one of those topics which is really going to resonate with Bitcoiners. It's really going to be a topic that they understand and agree with you on a lot. So people listening, the book's How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. We will include it in the show notes, encourage people to go and buy it. But just before we talk about the book, what's the background? Why this? Why were you drawn to this as a subject?
Sure. So I've been doing independent journalism in Houston, Texas, where I'm originally from, since 2012, and around 2013, I was leaked some images from the Houston Police Department showing that I was under surveillance. Myself and an activist group that I started called the Houston Freethinkers, 2 different police sources sent me pictures of myself and some other folks on a video screen with police officers in the room during a training session. And so when I realized I was under surveillance for building community gardens and spreading alternative currencies and things like this, I decided on the journalistic side, I need to learn as much as I can about what does that even mean to be under surveillance? What kind of tools do they have? I started researching Stingray cell phone surveillance tools, facial recognition, just learning the full gamut, heat detection technology, gate detection, voice detection, all this stuff that police departments in the United States increasingly have access to, and governments around the world, of course. So I've been on that journey focusing on digital technology, following facial recognition, following the concerns about digital identities and the threats that they can pose to privacy, to liberty, and things like that. And in 2019, I decided I wanted to write this book that was sort of both a call to action of like, hey guys, wake up, things are getting, we're moving in a pretty bad direction, but also asking the question, what does this mean for people who value privacy and liberty? How are we going to maintain that as we move forward to this world that, when I was first writing it, we hadn't heard the term central bank digital currencies yet, but we knew these sort of things were on the horizon. But what does it mean for a world with social credit scores, digital identities, central bank digital currencies, programmable money, things like that? We saw during COVID things like vaccine passports being used to exclude people from places or for services. And so I started writing the book in 2019. I published actually January 31st, 2020, so right before COVID happened. And I didn't mention anything about a pandemic in there, but definitely the things I was warning about happened 6 months after I published the book in terms of like, hey, we might see some of these digital restrictions. And so now there are a lot more people asking these questions. I ended up updating the book in the middle of COVID 2022, and this is the one you have here is the most recent. It's the second edition. So I wrote 5 new chapters based on what I witnessed and what we saw in COVID, because I moved from Texas to Mexico right at the beginning of COVID because I had a feeling it would be better. Mexico ended up being one of the only places, I think the only country that had no quarantines, tests, vax requirements, et cetera. So Canadians, folks from the UK, Australians, Germans flooded into Mexico during that time. And I was involved with in the book I talk about, we call it the counter-economic underground railroad or the modern underground railroad. And I was sort of predicting like in the future, if things get more tyrannical, there might be a need to help people with resources and things like that. We witnessed an early version of that during COVID with people like coming to Mexico in a panic, selling everything they own, just trying to get away from whatever they were dealing with and looking for answers. And so I gained a lot of insight, and I'm also part of something called the Freedom Cell Network that I co-founded in 2016. And so there's cells or groups all around the world. The US and Mexico definitely exploded during COVID. And so we traveled around, myself and my partner, we did a tour of the United States for 2 months and a tour of Mexico in the middle of COVID, giving speeches and talking to people and hearing about their experiences and what they're going through and hearing how they organized and how they used the Freedom Cell Network to find each other, to start growing food together, to buy land, and got a lot of solutions. And so I crowdsourced all that and put that into the most updated version of the book.
Amazing. Well, I got sucked in COVID. I fell for the whole fucking
Where were you
thing.
at?
I was in the UK.
That was pretty bad there, huh?
Well, what happened was because I traveled to do the podcast, when the first kind of, I was in South America. Where was I? Chile. I think I traveled from Chile to El Salvador, and I was also I can't remember where else I was, but in traveling around, it was just at the early stage at the airports, people were starting to wear masks. So it was like it would escape from China. And so there was like these just like early fears. Mm-hmm. And I went back to the UK, and then an opportunity came up to go and make a film out in Turkey about the migrant crisis on the border. And so I went out to Turkey. Erdogan had basically sent all the immigrants to the border to try and send them into Greece. And I went to a refugee camp, filmed it. And then when I came back to the UK, I basically left. The day I left was because the assumption was, I think it was the next day they were going to start the lockdown. So I was like, quick, I'll get out and do this film. Came back. I was really sick. I think I got COVID. Oh, wow. I was so sick, like the sickest I've probably ever been. But I couldn't get tested because there were no tests at that point. And so I came back and I was following the news reports in Italy. So I felt for the whole thing. I was like, yeah, I was pro-lockdown. Yeah.
That's where they were just shutting everything down.
Shutting down. I was like, yeah, this lockdown makes sense. A couple of weeks, flatten the curve, like an idiot. I fell for it. I fell for the vaccine. I got vaccinated. I fell for all of it. And like afterwards, I'm like...
Did you get vaccinated more than once?
I did. By none of the boosters, but I had the AstraZeneca, which was 2
a double shot.
Yeah, it's a double shot.
You see all the news recently, right, about it? Like now they're recalling the whole thing.
I know. I might drop dead during this interview.
Hopefully not.
But I regret it. It's funny, in this world of Bitcoin, we're full of libertarians and free thinkers. And the entirety I've been doing this podcast, people have been like, oh, you believe the state too much. I'm like, no, democracy's great. And like, it's taken a long time to get there. But COVID was definitely one of the ones after us. I was like, fuck, I fell for all of this shit. Obviously, a lockdown's not going to work. You're restricting freedom, so you can't stop a virus.
Yeah.
You cannot stop an airborne virus. So I fell for that, and then I fell for the vaccine, that it was safe, and I just fell for all of it. And I was just like, afterwards, I was like, shit.
Yeah, it's
rough.
Well, I mean, I like to empathize and have compassion for people, even though there's still people hanging on to this idea, because, I mean, we're faced with the world's biggest history's most expansive propaganda machine that we've ever seen, from all over the world, all the stations, BBC, et cetera, just running the propaganda. And I think that the closest I came to buying it was the first week. So when we left Houston, I mean, we literally, the day the U.S. started talking about, well, first what I saw was in New York, they started checking license plates of people going state to state. I was like, okay, that's not a good sign.
Yep.
And the next day they started talking about shutting the border down. And I've always felt like, for me, that's a red line in the sand, like stopping travel, even if it means like state to state, like, and Texas is a big state, right? But still, it's like, I don't want, even if the cage is the side of Texas, I don't want to be stuck. I want to know I can move about, right? So that was a line in the sand for me. We loaded up the Jeep, headed to the border, and got across. And I remember the first day, and the toilet paper was starting to run out already and all that stuff. First day we crossed into Mexico, we stopped in Monterrey, which is like the first big city on the border. And I think we had gloves for the first day. Like we wore gloves, like we were like afraid to touch things maybe for a day or two. But then it became pretty clear to me that like something was not up. And then very quickly on, I learned about PCR tests. I started doing a lot of research about that. I put out a mini documentary about it and just stayed on it. And I write with Ryan Christian and Whitney Webb at The Last American Vagabond. And, you know, we were all pretty much just tearing apart every angle of it from the beginning, doing our job. And I mean, when it felt like there was just a constant battle to try to get information out, right? Because to people like yourself who are hearing all this other stuff and...
Oh, I was hearing both sides though.
Yeah, so you did at least have access to...
But I was a little bit skewed. I used to have this other podcast called Defiance, and one of my friend's brother's a doctor. And so I did an interview with him. It's out there, you can hear it. He was explaining that they had to declare an emergency at the hospital because they had a trickle of people coming in, and that trickle became a flow, and then too many people came to the hospital they couldn't deal with. And people were like, COVID was real in that there were people who got sick. I agree.
I got sick as well. Something got me for sure.
And some people got really sick and some people died. And usually they had some comorbidity or, probably they're fat ass like me or something.
Unhealthy. There's things going on, not what they were telling us though.
Yeah. And so, he as a doctor was saying like, he cries in the interview. It was terrible. He had people coming in and they couldn't breathe and they didn't have enough, ventilators. They didn't know how to use the ventilator. I do believe early on there was a panic and people didn't know what they were dealing with.
And they would be given bad information too from people from the top. I mean,
but then I think they started to know, and that's So there was like information. I was getting both bits of information, but when you're hearing the people online are saying this is all bullshit, and you got a doctor saying you're dealing with like you're wrestling with conflicting information.
And also, we've all been programmed since birth to believe in credentialism and trust the person with the letters next to their name or the papers on their wall or whatever. And I dealt with that. Like I see that as an independent journalist, right? There are people who are like, okay, well, tell me what's your medical degree you have, this and that. Even if I'm quoting from other studies or doctors, there's always a battle of that kind of trying to overcome the propaganda. I mean, the masses were propagandized in a big way. And I'm glad to see though now, it's been 4 years now, here we are talking about it. And a lot more people have woken up to various things. And in general, I would say distrust of government, distrust of media is massive. And I mean, part of me is of course like celebrating that, but also I think there's some unintended consequences of that the reality is society gets less stable too. Like we can't agree on anything anymore. Things are becoming more and more fractured in that way. And thankfully though, there are people I think who are seeing what's going on, and more importantly for me, because this is what my book focuses on, is solutions. Like, because there's a lot of people asking these questions. I do journalism documentaries to try to put that info out there, but to me the important thing has always been, but what are we going to do about it, right? Like we can just watch it get worse on the internet, we can complain about it, we can tweet about it, whatever. But how do we actually, or are there things we can do to actually help ourselves, our families, our communities, to maybe either prevent this world that some people are trying to build, which is less privacy, less freedom, and more control, or maybe even, again, back to that building parallel systems, like potentially carve a new path that leads us somewhere, somewhere free.
Well, on the surveillance side of things, the UK, particularly London, is one of the most surveilled cities in the world. But again, one thing I wrestle with is the flip side of this. My friend Sarah Everard was murdered. I don't know if you followed the story in the UK. A young blonde girl was murdered by a policeman.
I do remember that story.
Okay. So she worked for me for 6 years or 5 years or something. So I know her very well. And so when it came out that she disappeared, obviously it was terrible and nobody knew where she was. But she was found because of a camera that existed on a bus. I think they were seen and they kind of knew the area she was walking, the time of night. So eventually they had the access to the camera on the bus. They saw her talking to a man. He picked up the number plate of the car. Sure. They traced that to the rental company and they traced it to the policeman who did it. So they eventually arrested the policeman. Obviously raped and killed her, the fucking scumbag. But they found him. And I'd spoken to one of my friends at the Met Police, and when she just went missing, he said one of the things they will be doing is looking into police reports of anyone who's exposed themselves. Because what tends to happen when somebody goes and rapes and murders somebody, there's a build-up. They don't just wake up one day and do it. There's like this urge inside them. And it starts with some kind of weird kind of exposing themselves.
Yeah.
Shock horror. It turns out this guy had gone to a McDonald's and exposed himself.
Oh.
But after he'd murdered Sarah, he'd be perfectly capable of going murdering and raping and killing more people. So I do wrestle with the idea of, well, without that surveillance just by the bus, having the bus having the camera, we might not have found him at that time.
I mean, it's all technology, right? It's a tool.
Yeah.
And that same technology, finds a criminal and puts them where they belong behind bars, right? And that same technology, when equipped with things like facial recognition technology, can track an activist who's just exercising their freedom of speech and make connections, because that's usually how it happens. We know data is the new oil, right? So they find out, well, you visit this place often, that you do that, you go to these places, they start building a profile on you. Those things can be used against us now or later, right? But I mean, I think
what is the correct wielding of this technology?
I mean, that probably depends on culture to culture even, right? I mean, and so here in the US, most of us really do value privacy, although I would say, unfortunately, I've seen, I was 17 when 9/11 happened, but I've definitely seen a noticeable drop in people who value privacy, or who you'll see a common thing of like, well, I have nothing to hide. Maybe that's all over the world, people who just have that default answer. What I usually do is say, can I see your phone? And then you'll see right away people do have not things to hide, but that they value levels of privacy.
Show me your browser history.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so we all value some level of privacy.
Yeah.
It might be different person to person, culture to culture, but in the US, the general idea is that you're free from search and seizure, freedom of speech, et cetera. But with some of these new technology, facial recognition particularly, and of course AI is, again, a tool doing some great things, but also can do some worrisome things. The AI behind the Israeli bombing system, for example, tracking and bombing people. These things can obviously be used against us. So ultimately, again, this is sort of part of what the book is, like asking a question. I have my way of living. I haven't used a bank since 2008. I have one ID, a passport. I don't have a relationship with certain US government agencies. I live a certain way that allows me for the freedom I want.
That's why they're tracking you.
But I also am just not saying like, hey, live the way I have because that's the perfect one way. But instead saying like, let's have a conversation and let's think about the ways that we relate to different technology, right? Like I don't use... I don't have a cell phone myself. My partner does. I use it occasionally, right? She uses a privacy phone. My buddy has a company called Above Phone. They de-Googled privacy phones with decentralized apps. So I make a compromise. I make a choice like that. I choose not to work with the banks. I do certain things that, for me, keep my life and my principles in line with what I want. But more, I think what I'm asking people to do is say, do I need the phone that reads my face, just for the convenience? Or now, do I want to, the next thing in stores is facial recognition, allowing touchless pay and everything. So you don't have to talk to a human. You just walk in, it scans your face and automatically knows that you have X bank account or you connect it, prior. Amazon has this. They're launching it in certain places. Here in Austin, I think. And so you go and you buy what you want, or you grab what you want, and you just walk out. And then because it has your face connected to your account, it automatically deducts it from your account. Super convenient, super easy. This is the way these tools are going to be sold to us: convenience, entertainment. And we have to decide as individuals, families, communities, et cetera, where's the line for us?
Well, do you know, you must know Jameson Lobb.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jameson, I've known him for a long time. He's like episode 3 guest of this podcast. Oh, nice. And like he's brilliant at this stuff about making himself untrackable. He went through his whole swatting incident, but one of the easiest things he was saying, like certain tools on your phone you can get rid of. So if you get rid of, say, the tracking on Google Maps, but then when you take away the tracking, like all the useful things go. So it is like that real challenge, and I think there are different levels, but a lot of people want convenience. That's and they don't understand what they're giving up or fear the slippery slope to dystopia we're heading down.
Yeah, and well, so this is one of the things I'll say to people. So like if you're not willing to just learn so for example, the Above Phone, it has organic maps, Magic Street. There's all sorts of open source alternatives to Google Maps. I would say that some of them are not on par, like yet, they're still in development. But there's other tools available out there. There's alternatives to YouTube. There's alternatives to everything that we're using. Instead of Google Drive, use CryptPad, or there's no more Google.com. There's a bunch of resources, right? To me, the point is like, if that's the line for you, then maybe you really don't want privacy or freedom, right? If like you're like, oh no, the limit for me is learning a new tool,
Oh, I think a lot of the time it comes down to the effort.
Yeah,
I do.
Some people don't want to even bother to learn something, and again, like then maybe that's the level of privacy and freedom that you value. Like you don't value it enough to learn something new, to make more than of an effort of reading a new device or having a new tool that you have a slight learning curve. Instead, you want to do with what's built into your phone, what's built into your device, which is going to be Microsoft, Apple, Google, a lot of the companies that are funding this potential dystopia, and working towards a world that I don't think most people listening to this will really value in the long term, even if they don't quite see, what is potentially coming.
Kurt, can you look up Vermont's data privacy legislation? Because I think that's something they're working on in Vermont. I could be wrong. The big hope for mass scale changes is that it becomes something that the legislature that works on and ensures we have data privacy, and it comes from strong governments in a strong democracy. Okay, the Vermont legislature passes data privacy bill that could shape national efforts. Vermont lawmakers passed the data privacy bill that relates to protecting personal health information, among other categories of sensitive data such as geolocation and biometric data.
That's a great effort.
Yeah, and so rather than having like a couple of people in Vermont who do it, this could protect people statewide and maybe nationwide.
I definitely support efforts to, so for example, this weekend when I was at the Libertarian Convention, I interviewed Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey. He's, as far as U.S. politics goes,
great,
he's one of the best people there. He actually gets it. And he just last week co-sponsored a bill to end the Federal Reserve, but also he's working with
crazy, right?
Pretty cool. He's working with another guy on a bill to fight against CBDCs. And so he was talking about that. Like of course, like anybody who's going to fight in the political realm and try to bring awareness to these things, I think that's probably a net positive. I just personally I'm not going to wait around for them to fix it and assume that, because for one, a bill can fail. Most of the time, bills get watered down by the time they actually become law, right? There's exceptions. We've seen the government will do all kinds of workarounds, right? And even if they pass a law that says, hey, we promise you we'll never spy on you again, are we really going to trust that, right? It's hard to know. Now, if it brings awareness, of course, those are all good things, For me, it's like just trying to encourage people to not... I'm a guy who doesn't believe in violence as the answer. I'm not going to be storming the Capitol anytime and trying to impose my will on anybody or something like that. I don't think violence or voting is the answer per se. I did run for local politics in Houston to try to raise awareness on stuff, but I'm not going to place all my eggs in my basket of, a new president's going to come along and fix things. I think there's better ways to spend our time. And I also don't think the answer is just being apathetic or black-pilled and everything's screwed. There's nothing we can do. I do believe that there are things like, Bitcoin is one of the first things that got me excited in this idea back in 2012, because I've been on this path even before I started to understand it philosophically. Like I mentioned, I got out of prison in 2008 the final time, and that was around the time where I stopped using banks. And it kind of just happened because I sucked at keeping a bank account and I overdrafted and I was like, all right, I need to maybe not have a bank for a while. But shortly after that, in 2010, I discovered Ron Paul, started reading some of his work, learning about the Federal Reserve, and then of course, learning more about the financial crisis in 2008 and the banks being behind that. And it just made sense to me that like, I don't want to participate in those systems. Like if these are the people doing these things, then I kind of learned later, this is called agorism. There's a whole philosophy of building new systems. And then when I discovered Bitcoin, I was like, oh my God, this could be a potential tool to achieve some of these things. So I was very much like, bright-eyed, all excited coming into it and curious as a journalist. And I noticed right away at the Texas Bitcoin conference that there was like, okay, the community who is maybe more libertarian or anarchist side of things, and others even back then who were like, regulation is the key to success. And if we're going to ever be taken seriously, we need to have, these mainstream government models, blah, blah, this sort of thing. There was always that sort of different crowds. I think that crowd is kind of leading the way these days, and at least from my perspective. And there's still the libertarian anarchists within the community, the broader crypto space and Bitcoin, of course. But that was what got me excited about it originally. And I started using it. I did 2 tours of the U.S. in 2017, 2018, sponsored by Roger Ver and Bitcoin.com, going around and just opening up wallets and spreading it and trying to, because I believe...
Hold on, Bitcoin Cash wallets?
Originally Bitcoin in 2017, but then right after that tour is when they switched. So then 2018, I think it was Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, you need to get away from that shit. You do understand why Bitcoin Cash is a shitcoin. And
I'd love to hear your perspective. I'm not a maxi on this, like personally, because I've just again, I want something that works, right? And for me, I love Monero. I love privacy. I still hold Bitcoin and use Bitcoin, but I definitely don't see it as digital gold as being like the solution for me. So I'd love to hear your perspective on it, of course. I just don't take a personal stake in it.
No, and look, I want to find out more about your book and you. I don't want to debate you and impose my opinions on you. I am Bitcoin. I don't want to say Bitcoin maximalist because I don't give a shit really that the other stuff exists. It's just Bitcoin to me is the best of all the currencies. A Bitcoin Cash came out of something called the Fork Wars. It was it was a block size war.
Yeah, I was there for that.
Yeah, so it was a block size war. Like Roger and his crowd believed in bigger blocks, and I understand why they believe in it, and I understand their arguments, and there's validity in part of their arguments. But I am myself somebody who believes in smaller block sizes because I believe in decentralization, maximum decentralization at the base chain. And so I came with Bitcoin. And a lot of people who went down the Bitcoin Cash route have lost a lot of money. And I feel for those. So, and then all the other cryptocurrencies, for me, none of them are meaningfully decentralized. And in the end, there's only going to be one winner, these things. It's not going to be, the trajectory isn't lots of cryptocurrencies succeeded. Only one will win. And
why do you think that is? Like what?
I think others will exist.
Preferable? Like
I think you'll have a market, others exist, but people trend towards the best money.
Sure.
And I've seen that in action. When I was out in Lebanon, you have the Lebanese pound, but you also have dollars. People want dollars because the Lebanese pound is shit. Yeah. And so what happens is when you're buying for something in the shop, you will pay and you'll change. Your loose change. So say you buy something that's $100 and you need $21.50 in change. They'll give you a $20 note, $1.50 in the Lebanese pound. But when anyone goes into the shop, they're spending the Lebanese pound first because it's shit. It's it's inflated away.
Get rid of it,
yeah. Gresham's law, I believe it's called. Is that correct? Yeah, Gresham's law. I've seen the same in Cambodia. I've seen the same in Venezuela. And so the reason people hodl their Bitcoin is because they don't want to get rid of it because it's good money. So I get rid of my pounds or my dollars first. I think the same will happen in the cryptocurrency world. Like if I got Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash and I believed it was a better money, I would hold that and spend my Bitcoin. I do the best to never spend my Bitcoin because it is the best form of money and the world is repricing it. And it's for a number of reasons. Look, it's the most decentralized. It has the biggest, not necessarily the biggest, I can't prove that, but definitely the best developer base. It had its immaculate conception. There was no...
isn't part of holding it like with the anticipation that there will be some gains?
Yeah, of course. But
me,
I do spend it as well.
So for me, like that's like, obviously like I hold it for that same purpose. But if I want to buy a plane ticket, I'm going to use cheap air travel options where I can spend Bitcoin or some alternative to the US dollar to do what I want, because I want it to be a functional currency. And during those times, whenever the high fees that everybody knows about, it's like, oh dang, I'm trying to open up wallets for people and just like, hey, $5, let me send you $5. And it was charging me $10 to send that $5. You know what I mean? It becomes like, okay, I'm trying to teach people this is something that could free us and create a whole new system. And they're like, my bank charges less than this to transfer money. You know?
So there's nuance to this. What's happening is to maintain Bitcoin's maximum decentralization, we have to have small blocks. If you go for bigger blocks, you just have to go bigger again. You always there's no end. So we maintain this, 1 megabyte block, 4 megabyte block height. And then we try and scale Bitcoin on the layers above. And so there's great
layer 2. So you think like the layer 2 solutions are the solution?
And this isn't easy. We're trying, I say we, the developers are trying to build a decentralized form of money that the government can't seize, switch off, and censor. That's a tough task. And you can make easy compromises along the way. Bigger blocks because you want more people on the base chain. But that's a compromise to decentralization. And if our principle is separate money and state, we need to maximize and maintain a maximally decentralized money so we can keep this away from the government.
So do you think that's all possible, like on Bitcoin, like
yes.
both keeping it where, okay, it's something I can hold is valuable. Like you said, the people who want good money feel good about it, but also someone like me can spend it to buy things
of course.
In a way that's not going to cost me $30 every time.
Yeah, look,
this is all possible with Bitcoin.
Absolutely. So the hodling phase, which we're going through, where people hold onto their Bitcoin, is because the world is repricing Bitcoin. And as I said, people will get rid of the crap money first. I don't want to sell my Bitcoin when I've got pounds, but I do spend Bitcoin. Sure. I spent 0.45 Bitcoin today, a donation to a project. I will spend Bitcoin. If I'm in El Salvador, I've got my wallet out. But like last night, we went to dinner, and we had a steak dinner, and the bill came out, and they said, "Oh, we accept Bitcoin." They know I'm a Bitcoin. I was like, "Yeah, but I'm going to give you my pounds or my dollars. I want to keep that Bitcoin." And I think there'll be a transitionary phase where over time people spend Bitcoin more and more. I am spending it more and more, but we have to weed out the shit currencies first, and we weed out the shit currencies by holding on to the good currency it increasing value and more people joining this network. And so, look, there's nuance to it, but absolutely, look, the Lightning Network is the way to do low costs. Have you never used the Lightning Network?
No, I have. I have a few friends who are maxis who, they keep me informed.
Do you know Matt Odell?
I don't think so. I don't think I've met him yet.
You absolutely need to meet Matt Odell. So Matt Odell is a hardcore Bitcoiner, but he focuses on freedom tech. So not just not just Bitcoin.
Number go up.
No, but not just Bitcoin, but he focused on Nostar and various other freedom tech.
And I support these efforts. I mean, this is again part of what my book is talking about, is trying to encourage people to, as the title says, opt out. So it's not just finances, which is obviously a huge part of the potential control grid, CBDCs, et cetera, but different areas of our life and looking for freedom tech in all these areas.
But by the way, sorry, one other thing, money should appreciate in value. It shouldn't. The only reason money loses value is because the government increases the level of debt and they debase it. Every one of us should be able to do a day's work, get a day's pay, and then save that for the future and it appreciate in value over time. That everyone deserves it, but we've all been, it's a bit like the surveillance stuff. Yeah. We've just been gaslit into accepting no privacy.
Fake inflationary money.
Yeah, we've been gaslit into accepting the same. And so what we now have is a consumption culture rather than saving culture. When I was a kid, my parents saved, right? And interest rates were about where they are now, maybe higher. And that was the norm. Right now, our society sees interest rates as a punishment on your mortgage, where previously it was seen as a reward for your saving, for being conservative. We've lost that because we went to this crazy world of 0% interest rates. So money should appreciate in value. But I think as I'm going to go down your rabbit hole, I think you'll go down this one a bit more. All those other, like Monero, I'm cool with that.
Do you think Monero is a shitcoin?
No. No, look, everything but Bitcoin's a shit. I'm fine with I'm fine with Monero. I think Monero's cool. I've interviewed Fluffy Polo.
Do you think it's more private than Bitcoin?
It's definitely more private than Bitcoin. You've got difficult on and off ramps, but the thing about Bitcoin is achieving privacy with Bitcoin is very hard. You have to be technically competent, and you can make a silly mistake and you lose it.
Do you think it's going to get to a point where it won't need to be that? Because I mean, we're not going to have mass adoption if people have to figure out complicated L2 solutions.
No, we'll have mass adoption. What we won't have is mass adoption of a privacy
layer.
Yeah, of a privacy layer. But doing privacy on the base layer, Monero is difficult. The great thing about Bitcoin is you can audit it. We know there's 21 million. We don't know if there's inflation within Monero because the privacy is at the base chain. But look, I absolutely think Monero is cool. There are certain transactions I would do, like certain ones I want to do. That I would definitely use Monero because me as somebody who's not technically competent can make those transactions quite easy.
I hold both. I mean, like I said, that's what I was saying. Like I'm not like hardcore in one camp, you know.
But what I'm saying is I don't hold Monero because I don't believe I think it will lose value against Bitcoin. And what I want to do is preserve wealth for me and my kids.
I hear you on that side. For me, when I say I hold it, I hold it because I want to be able to spend it, right? And the one beautiful thing up until a week ago when local Monero closed down out of the same fears we were talking about earlier, in Mexico is one of the few countries where I can go to local Monero and I could say I'm going to sell a couple hundred USD worth of Monero, initiate the transaction. And one of the options to get paid is to get code at the ATM. So you basically, in Mexico, there's a button that says cash without card. And so the person on the other end, he sends me a 16-digit code. I go to the ATM of the bank we've discussed, and I don't have to show ID. I don't have to go into the bank, just the ATM. Put in the 16-digit code, cash comes out, finalize the transaction, he gets the Monero. I love doing. I mean, it's so beautiful. I want that convenience for Bitcoin. I want to be able to turn my Bitcoin into cash if needed. Obviously, I want to hold Bitcoin, and I want a world where, and this is one of the points I wanted to make, is for me, I want more people to adopt Bitcoin, and I want the steak place to offer Bitcoin. I want the smoothie place I go to accept Bitcoin, and I still want to hold it for the inflationary value you're talking about. But also, I would like to know that I can use non-state money where I go and not have to okay, well, now I got to pull out. I mean, I get the idea of spending the worthless cash. Like, I get that idea. But I do want to be able to live in a world where we can have money. Like, one of the reasons I don't interact with certain agencies is because I don't want to support those banks. I don't want to support those particular 3-letter agencies that are funding war and violence and death and bombs. And so to me, that, that's why I care about the type of money I spend. I'd rather get to a point where I could use Bitcoin everywhere and hold some too as well, not, just cash out every day. And in a way that's usable on a simple basis for most people. And yeah, if there's L2 privacy solutions that are there too as well, I'd love to learn them. Right now, Monero is the simple, easy way to do that. But I don't have a real hard stance where I'm fuck all the rest of those ones. But I see the argument.
I mean, look, Lightning's fairly private. eCash is fairly private as well, which is like an emerging way of sending Bitcoin. But I think it's probably one of the most private versions. They come with trade-offs and risks. But things like Bitcoin Cash is just it is a fake crappy version of Bitcoin, which will just continue to collapse in price. And I just tell people to avoid it because you're going to lose money. Most of those things, like Ethereum isn't money, Solana isn't money. They're not meaningfully decentralized. They're because Ethereum's gone to staking. It's actually a centralizing force.
Yeah, I don't support ETH.
Yeah,
like, I'm not involved in there.
I mean, I'm more of a I just don't care. Like, do what the fuck you want. But if you want the best form of money, it's Bitcoin. And I am patient and support the hard computer engineering task of maintaining decentralization. But you absolutely should meet Matt O'Dell. I think you and him will get on really well.
I'll check him out.
But if you come to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, I can introduce you to Matt. But I'll introduce you ahead of time.
Sure.
He'll probably want you on his pod. He'll do a better job of explaining this with me. But he's much more like under the full umbrella of freedom tech, which is probably what you're about.
Yeah, awesome. I'll check that out. Yeah.
So you've avoided using the banks. I mean, what challenges does that provide, or is it just like learning a new language? And once you're in there, it's easy.
It's challenging. I mean, both of those things apply. It's once you figure it out, then you learn the tools and the tricks and tips. But it's challenging, and I write about that in the book. There's one particular chapter where I explicitly discuss so I have a few strikes against me. I'm a felon, as I mentioned earlier. I don't have a bank history. I don't have, if I go, so for example, I go to try to get a new apartment here in Houston or Austin, they'll ask me to see my pay history. I'm like, well, I get paid through crypto and, other means. I can show you that if you want to, if you can understand that, if they even understand what I'm talking about.
Big ass deposit then you have to give.
Yeah. So with the felon law stuff, it's huge deposit. There's barriers, right? But also there's kind of, I think, a deeper layer to that. When you talk to people, they look at you a certain way. If you don't have a tax history, a bank account, if I don't have like a state ID, I have a passport, but all these things, I think there's built-in assumptions that we've been, again, programmed with that like, a person that doesn't have documents, like they're not a real person. They're not professional or they're not an adult or all these sort of built-in assumptions. Cause I see the way people kind of look at me like with, cross eyes that I don't have these things. But
sorry, on the felon thing, is that something that stays as a record for life?
Oh, it's apparently so. I mean, it's about to be the 20th anniversary next year that I got arrested. And I mentioned I ran for office in Houston, mayor of Houston. They kicked me off the ballot last year because of this 19-year-old nonviolent felony. So apparently they still hold it against you. But I've kind of, because of my lifestyle, I've been, I'll say, lucky enough to have created my own path, like as an entrepreneur, so nobody's doing a background check for a podcaster to write articles and do things like that. But if I go back into that matrix, if you will, go try to get an apartment, or if I was to go back and apply for some mainstream job, I'm sure those things would be brought up. And again, it would be brought up of like, I have no history. But I've thought of other solutions, like, using the blockchain, for example. And the book I was writing at the time, it was Steam It and some other websites. Like,
I remember Steam It.
I could theoretically, like when I get paid every month for my writing at The Last American Vagabond, I could take a screenshot of that and put, have a Steam It account or some alternative course that just is just screenshots of my pay history right there, and just keep a record of that on a blockchain. If somebody understood that, then I can say, yeah, here's all the pay stubs I have, instead of a check. There's ways that I can use this technology. But again, a lot of the systems that I think are going to be needed to create parallel systems and to exit from what I call exit and build are still being built. Just like Bitcoin, we're very early in this like tools. And of course we see the state kind of incoming, trying to take down anybody who's daring to build new alternatives. It's an interesting time to be around, but that's exactly why I think that the book is so important right now.
So there is a growing alternative infrastructure. There's like a good, like you can survive. Like it's a bit tricky at times, but you can manage, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I do manage. I mentioned like the local Monero thing, and there's tricks and things like that I've learned. Of course, people know you can buy you can use crypto to buy, gift cards and anonymous debit cards. There's different ways you can go about it. I've had to learn all this myself, and then of course dealing with cash is a way to stay anonymous as well, private, have some more privacy than using the card all the time or things like that. And I've also had to learn like what I call half steps or half measures in that way, because you don't go from being like, I've got a 401k, I'm $20,000 in debt, and I have everything connected to a bank account, to being where I'm at overnight. Like the way I see it is like there's steps that you can take, and again, everybody's going to have a different line. For me, I'm kind of out on the edges, pushing as far as I can. Somebody might be like, well, you know what? I'm willing to change from a big bank to a credit union and have a little more say over my money then. And I'm going to finally start exploring crypto, things like that, where you're starting to take steps where you're realizing, okay, I'm totally dependent on the grocery store. And during COVID, I got locked out of my grocery store unless I had proof of vaccine. So maybe I should think of an alternative. I'm going to get to know the local farmers market, or I'm going to start growing some food in my backyard. Looking at these different areas of potential control, food, economics, the education system, all these things, and seeing how can we exit from those systems and build and or support those who are building new systems.
How big is this movement?
Well, I was just in Texas last week at the Exit and Build Land Summit, the 5th one. So the idea caught on with my buddy John Bush. We co-founded the Freedom Cell Network together, and there's people using that term now. I'll just say that, like, I'll see sometimes people using it as a hashtag and stuff like that. And this has been my most popular book. It's an underground bestseller. I would say it's in Spanish now. It's being translated Japanese now. It's in German and multiple languages that people have just taken on their own. So it's becoming more of a thing. I would say, like, I'm kind of a part of out of the broader liberty movement. I'm part of the section that's focused on solutions and not political solutions, more like exit and build parallel systems, et cetera. Like, and crypto is, for some of us, is a part of that. There's still people who are scared or don't understand crypto, or they equate CBDCs and Bitcoin they don't, obviously there are some concerns within the Bitcoin community connected to Blockstream and people tied to the Bilderberg Group and stuff like that. Things that Whitney's reported about and others, myself as well, that, push people away or cause them concern. But I think most of that is people who have never opened a wallet, or they don't know anything about crypto. So they're just like, digital money, I'm scared. I don't know what to do.
We're gonna get you to a place where you just say Bitcoin, not crypto. We're gonna work on that.
Okay. I know that's a sensitive point for some people. Yeah.
Well, look, the thing is, it is becoming the term. I mean, look, Donald Trump said it this week at the convention you were at. By the way, how was that? Was it wild?
It was a wild moment. I recorded the whole thing. That's on my website and on my channels. I shared some clips of like the free Ross moment, but yeah, it was wild. That was the Libertarian Convention, the first time I've been to that one. And the major reason I went was because RFK was speaking, then I'm working on an interview with him, but also because Trump was going to be there. And it's just like, all right, I got to be there. I got to see how this goes down.
That. Because RFK's come out and said, I'm happy to be the nomination for the Libertarian Party.
He didn't get it. They officially nominated somebody else, Chase Oliver, last night or this morning.
And that's probably the right thing to do.
I think so.
Because he's not a Libertarian. No, he's not a Libertarian. But
he wasn't really well received. I mean, I wouldn't say he didn't get any boos like Trump did, but in general, the room was like half full. People clapped whenever he said some good things, but overall, I don't think anybody was majorly convinced.
The boos are a crowd. They're going to be libertarians who are going to vote for Trump because they think Trump is a lesser evil than Biden. And I get that.
I've met some of those people as well. I totally disagree on, I don't really play the lesser of two evils game. I would say I disagree about just voting in general and thinking that one of them is going to do better. But I think Trump doing what Trump does, which is what lies and makes promises like all politicians. Last time when he ran, he said a little thing about 9/11 for maybe the 9/11 truther crowd, said a little thing about the Federal Reserve, said a thing about Julian Assange, didn't do anything for any of it. Yeah. So this time he comes to libertarian promises, we'll put a libertarian office, okay? We're going to defend crypto and protect you from CBDCs, and we're going to free Ross, right? He said things that he knew that crowd was going to, and then those moments, there was applause, there was cheer, there was support, of course, for it, but the vast majority was people booing him, telling him like, hey, you raised the debt higher than any other president before. You locked us up, Fauci, et cetera. You're still promoting the vaccines and ignoring people being injured. And just, there was a lot of, I was participating in some of this as I had, took off my journalist hat for a second, and it was cathartic, I would honestly say, because I think that personally, for whatever good people might see, that I have a very different view than some people. I think Trump has been very divisive for the freedom movement and a wrecking ball. And now there are people who are convinced that he's the only way to stop us from the deep state, when people can go look up an article I wrote at the end of his presidency called "Here are 18 Ways Trump Served the Deep State." If you want to,
Okay, wow, yeah, I definitely want to read that.
And yeah, my point is though that I don't think this guy, and I was honestly, even though I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party, I've never been a member of that, but I'm, again, part of the broader movement, the liberty movement, I would say, and have been for a decade now, speaking at events all over the world about libertarianism, that it was a proud moment to see them boo him, for sure. It was, and now it was interesting too, because there was a bunch of Trump supporters in the back of the room. It was, there was moments of, there was fist fights for sure. There was a couple of fist fights. There was a couple of like just scuffles and talking shit to each other, because there was some confusion where a bunch of Trump supporters got brought in the first 4 rows in the beginning. And I knew there was going to be conflict because I had been hearing, oh, these rows are reserved for the party delegates who paid to be there and all this sort of stuff. So, but they were still doing business. When that business wrapped up, then all of a sudden these libertarians flooding in, coming up to Trump supporters like, what the heck are you doing here? And there's just, security had to get involved, and, it was interesting.
I saw a few of Dave Smith's clips, which, by the way, I love that guy. He's fucking incredible. Yeah,
I connected with Dave there as well. He gave, I think he was bringing some common sense messages there. I think maybe being a little soft on Trump, but overall, I'm glad to see that there was not just this, what the mainstream was trying to portray it as like, oh, the libertarians are just Trump light or Republican light or something. It was cool to see that, hey, some people actually do stand for their principles and aren't just going to be swept up in promises by another politician who, by the way, could have already freed Ross, could have already freed Julian Assange,
I know.
Could have locked her up, could have done all the things he claimed.
Yeah, I know. And I never know the competing forces behind that. Because from my understanding, from the people I've spoken to, Ross was close on the last one.
It was close. Apparently on his desk.
Yeah, and it got close. But I don't know what happens with the FBI coming in and saying things to him. I just don't. Yeah. I've never walked those shoes. It's like,
well, if he claims to be who he claims to be, then like you do it anyways.
Well, yeah, maybe, but it's a bit like Bukele in El Salvador. I think he is one of the. While you don't trust any politician, is one of the most promising ones. But naturally, you have people criticizing human rights records for what he's done with the gangs. And it's that compete.
It's delicate, right? Like,
it's delicate, yeah, because
things aren't all black and white. I get that.
And I've not walked in Bukele's shoes. By the way, as 2 people have talked about their addictions, aren't these a great device for junkies?
I actually just got this one. This is new to me.
Yeah. Well, you're new to vaping.
I'm new to vaping, and
you must have quit cigarettes.
This is actually cannabis, so I don't smoke tobacco.
Oh, I do. I'm still a crackhead. So going back, it's like Bukele. He's like this really complicated competing ideas that he has reduced the murder rate in El Salvador, in a country that's absolutely plagued by gangs and violence and murder and rape. We had these red zones which you could not enter, and now he's essentially.
I don't know what the perfect answer is, because you're right. Surely, I would guess, and I think we could make a fair assessment that probably everybody rounded up in these things wasn't guilty of doing some of the things they're accused of. Now, did they probably get real people, violent criminals? Of course, but as we always see with this, and this is something that all I think libertarians and hopefully Bitcoiners can see, that the state will claim they're going to do something good, and maybe that good does happen, but they're also going to always take extra powers when they get a chance. Any opportunity to expand their powers. But so there will surely be people who maybe are like, I actually didn't do anything. I just got, rounded up. Like after 9/11, they were going to go after terrorists and get all these people. Well, there was plenty of people who have since sued the U.S. government that were basically kidnapped, taken to black American citizens, but they happen to be brown or have the wrong last name, accused, guilty of nothing, and then taken away. Like, so things
rendition.
Like that. Exactly, rendition. So even when the good can potentially happen, I worry about the unintended or intended consequences.
Yeah, and I mean, just look, on that issue alone, like outside of the scope creep of what Bukele may or may not have done, I don't know the right answer.
Yeah.
You're coming in to solve a country that has a terrible problem with gangs, like a terrible problem. And he's solved it.
Yeah.
But what's the net damage he's done?
Sure.
Is it a net positive, net bad?
He's also trying to maybe keep himself in power as long as possible too. And I think that's where people's worry is at, like when somebody does come in and they do something good, but to do it, they're like, all right, I got to press this button. It's going to give me a lot of power, but I promise I'm not going to do anything bad with it. And then there's a temptation of like, well, I'll just stay in a little longer. I'll just, and before you know it, you got a left wing or a right wing authoritarian. It can happen either way. I guess that's kind of where I'm always at, is like, these situations are not black and white. Surely I'm not here claiming to have the perfect answer. I can't even imagine how I would start, right? But I definitely think that I would probably always err on the side of individual liberty. And like,
yes,
and this is of course the sort of tricky thing, right? Because like you mentioned earlier, well, instead of rounding up a bunch of people, you could have a surveillance state that makes it easy to find where the criminals are and who the good guys and the bad guys are. But then of course, at what cost to privacy and civil liberties, right? There's challenges here, and I get that.
Yeah. And how do you get there? I mean, you can't, like I've just interviewed Tuadamista, another really interesting Bitcoiner, and we've talked about the problem in politics. And if you go in as a politician and wants to change things, like how much can you change overnight? Like what can you do overnight? And if the path is liberty, how effective are the Libertarian Party being with 3% of the vote and no power? If you want to make change, do you have to make compromises to get in there just to try and influence things? Or are we going to gain liberty by people like you.
I think the culture moves it more. I mean,
culture, okay.
that phrase of like politics is downstream from culture, that like culture will move things first. Government's slow to respond. Like, for example, with cannabis is one of the greatest examples in the US. People, I mean, even in Texas, right? Austin is a little different, but generally speaking, it's still, you go to certain parts of Texas, you're going to be facing, jail time. And, but then there's other parts where people are smoking weed openly, buying it at the store, really professionally, got, cannabis lounges and all this stuff. And yet it's still illegal, according to the federal government. It is still illegal technically. It's just they don't have the manpower to do anything about it. And then just last week, Biden, they're like, okay, we're going to make this small little change. Like they're 40, 50 years behind the culture, but they're being forced to go along with it. Of course, there's financial incentives. But the point being, I think that I wouldn't even argue that the best way to achieve liberty is through the Libertarian Party. I think it has been a massive failure. And when you look back at the American Libertarian Party's history, like the people who are really like most of the party now is younger people and a mix of the older crowd that were inspired by Ron Paul, but before him, Murray Rothbard. He was like the big movement guy, and he was active in the 60s and 70s student movements, as well as Samuel Konkin, the founder of agorism. And they were, anti-war activists. They were protesting the Vietnam War. They were pro-desegregation, individual liberty, all these things that were very radical. And some of them went more conservative and joined the American right. But some of them continued on and said, hey, the best way is to form a political party. But it really came out of this like activist movement that was mostly anarchist back then and had different factions, of course, but it was a really burgeoning, fast-growing movement, anti-war, anti-taxes, all this. And in 1971, some of them came together and said, okay, well, political party. Well, here we are in 2024, and as Trump sort of made fun of them, like, well, you keep getting your 3% then or whatever, right? And that's on a good year. Like that was their best record ever, 3%. Normally it's 1% or lower. And I know a lot of those people. I was there with them this weekend, and I'm just watching the chaos and just like, wow, I have so much better, in my view, so much better ways to live liberty rather than arguing with people who I mostly believe on in some political system to run a candidate who's going to get less than 1% and try that every 4 years. When if I grow food in my backyard, I think I'm promoting more liberty than doing that. If more people start, like there's things that we can do in our own lives that to me, like that's a measurable moving of the ball, right? Bitcoin is one of those things, right? That to me is like way more likely to bring us into a world of liberty than 1% every 4 years.
Yeah, and I think the Libertarian Party, to be successful, has to compromise some of its principles because for them to have impact, they have to accumulate power, but accumulating power is antithetical to being a libertarian.
And that's kind of the thing. That's the conundrum, right? And this is where within the party you have the factions who are like, again, the professional types. Don't boo. Everybody be respectful, this and that, because they want to be perceived, because they knew the mainstream is watching. Like we got to hold ourselves up to the best standard. But you're dealing with people who very much believe in individual liberty and like, fuck you, don't tell me what to do. Yeah. So it's hard to kind of make that work. And then of course there are some who, and I heard this at the party, like people saying, if winning means becoming the Republicans or Democrats, then we don't want to win. We're okay with our 1% if it means we still have our principles. And I get that. I respect that more than personally saying like, look, we need to be more like the other parties so we can get the big money. This is, of course, the most attention they've ever got with Trump and RFK. Like, the fact that they're being discussed wouldn't have happened probably. No, there probably would have been one article about, oh, here's the Libertarian nominee. But because
then why be a party? Just be a movement. Because
that's what I think. I think the movement is more successful than the party. The party's within the broader movement, but it's a small faction of those of us out here who believe in these ideas.
Because of the two-party system, they can't have influence. Like in the UK, if there was there is a Libertarian Party, but if they actually had any meaningful success, say they got 3%, they had 3% of MPs within Parliament, they would be heard. They would be a voice at the dispatch box. They would be a voice arguing against them. Would they be at the dispatch box? Anyway, they'd be arguing against the Prime Minister. They would be able to, and if they could grow, they could influence. And the way they should influence is by saying no to everything, blocking things, and reducing spend. Another person you should meet is Derrick Broze. I interviewed him a long time.
I don't know him, but I know who he is.
Yeah, great guy. I'm seeing him he's in town this week. You should meet him. Cool. He's a great guy. He said to me, he's a libertarian. He said, I asked him, how are you going to get rid of government? How do you get the big red button? He said, I don't care about the big red button. I just want the government not to grow, like just reduce by 1%. And so a Libertarian Party with influence, maybe the job is where, we swing from left to right, but the state gets bigger. We don't have that swing from big to small. Maybe the goal of a Libertarian Party is just to influence government being smaller, spending less.
I think at best it could be, to use the term of some of the leftist movements, a vanguard for the libertarian movement. So at best, right, like you said, if the system was different, and this is one thing I think that even libertarians themselves are very divided over right now, that the party the last few years hasn't done a great job of running candidates. Like, yeah, they're running a presidential candidate, but nobody with name recognition that's getting announced 5 months before the election, right? It's not a very good position to be. They don't have any libertarian governors, libertarian mayors. I was endorsed by the Libertarian Party, but not a member of the party. But there's nobody that they can say, hey, look, we have seats, like we have representatives here and there that are fighting back, like maybe on the local level, the state level here and there. But
Dave Smith needs to run.
He was apologizing on Twitter today for he said, I'll take responsibility for this. Like if I would have run, I think we would have had a better chance. But my point is that these parties, they could be a representative of the movement, and they could, as you were saying, at least try to say, all right, we're going to block this thing. We're going to block this thing. Because that's one thing that people don't understand about libertarianism from the mainstream perspective. Like, they'll look at somebody like Ron Paul, who was a libertarian, but he chose to take the strategy that some have done. I'm like, all right, I'm going to run within those two mainstream parties. But, I'm still a libertarian, but I'm going to use because they have more money, they have more influence. And so he ran in the Republican primaries when he was running for presidential candidate. He was a Republican, even though he's clearly a libertarian. And so people look at his record and they'll say, like, yeah, but he didn't accomplish anything.
He accomplished loads.
He accomplished a lot, but not in the way that they want. To them, accomplishing means like spending your tax dollars on new programs, doing this, where he's like, no, I stopped this bill. I voted no against this. But they'll look like, well, he's never passed anything. But libertarians aren't trying to pass new laws to restrict things or to take money away from you. Yeah. Basically,
they're
people
trying to
say,
stop laws.
We're trying to stop. We're the people trying to take over the world to leave you alone and let you just have your freedom. And that's hard to translate into politics.
And I think the other thing that Ron Paul did is he's given people the idea there can be an alternative. When he was up there in the presidential debates, he was given an alternative view. And he wasn't doing it in that scummy, argumentative way that some people do. And he's like a real hero to a lot of people I know. I think Austin, I always forget his surname. I think he was part of the campaign team, and he still wears his
Austin Peterson.
I can't remember his name. He's got long hair.
Yeah, maybe so.
But anyways,
he's a hero to a lot of people.
Yeah, and so maybe there are more libertarians who maybe need to join the Democrat Party or the Republican Party and block shit and start making a difference, because there's very few good politicians.
That's like what Thomas Massey is like, I think, essentially that. He's, maybe a little older than some of the Ron Paul movement people who are now hitting their 40s and 50s and stuff like that. But I think he somewhat came out of that as well. And there's a few others who I think were also inspired by Ron Paul. And people who are, like we were saying earlier, okay, somebody's fighting things in Vermont, good. People are fighting there. I'm glad Massey's in there at least to be one voice of sanity and saying some things like that. But as Ron Paul showed, and as these guys are finding out, it's still hard to get anything done when the rest, you're surrounded by left-wing and right-wing statists who just want to grow the government in different ways. They each have their pet things that they're trying to push for, and they're like, oh yeah, these pesky libertarians, whatever, I just don't know if liberty is going to thrive in a political system. Yet at the same time, people should do whatever serves them best. If running for office, you feel like you can defend your community and protect it and promote these ideas, then do it. For me, I do it through books and speeches and talking to people and trying to live it and show, hey, here's ways we can get out of these systems and build new systems.
What do you make of Milei in Argentina?
Very skeptical of him. I mean, again, I think it's cool to see the libertarian name, and I've learned more about him recently in terms of his education, and I think he does have a legitimate background in terms of the philosophy and Austrian economics and everything. Again, to what we were talking about earlier about the use of police force, there's some of the things that I saw him doing during protests a couple months ago that I've talked to some Argentinians who are like, yeah, look, these are left-wing protesters who shut down everything and it, destroys businesses and this and that. And I hear those arguments, but I think also there's been some heavy-handedness that I've seen, and I'm watching with interest. I don't claim to be an expert for sure, but I'm also not like a lot of libertarians who are just thinking he's the second coming or something.
I think he's moved the needle in a better direction. He's reversed the course of history to an extent for Argentina right now, even a small amount.
It seems so far like a kind of first look at things are going in a positive direction. And I think that one thing that bothers me about our crypto and libertarian community is that we're sometimes too easily pleased. With Trump people, oh, look, he said something bad about people we don't like, so let's embrace him and ignore all these other things. And the trolling is funny, whether it's Trump or Milei or whatever, saying things that you're like, wow, I've never heard a politician say this or somebody say that on that stage. But we got to want more than that. Exactly. Talk is cheap. And what about action? What does that really look like? But there are some people who are just placated by oh, look, he said this funny thing about Hillary, or he did this thing, or he's, got the chainsaw, or whatever it may be. It's funny, it's attractive, it's part of like the meme culture and everything, but it doesn't necessarily mean action follows it,
Yeah.
I think that's what matters most.
We've gone on massive tangents here, by the way. So back to your book. Sure. So you've and the book is How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. So you've talked about banking, you've talked about areas of surveillance, you don't have a phone. What other things could people be doing? What other things do they need to be thinking about?
Well, so let me mention this too. People can definitely pick it up, a copy if you want a physical copy, but the PDF is available to download for free at my website, theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. So if anybody wants to pick up PDF and if you want to get a physical copy. Surveillance, we could talk about, like we talked about the phone, but then obviously on all of our devices. So for example, I'm at the LNC this weekend and I see that they're running their entire thing on Google Drive. Like, to me, this is like, there's a disconnect in the philosophy right there. Not attacking anybody who's still using Google. There's a lot of big companies and people, but I just think if we're going to think holistically, like, let's think about all the tools we're using, not just Bitcoin, or not just like, I've got the libertarian shirt on, I'm a member of the Libertarian Party, but I'm going to use a company and via that basically kind of tacitly support their actions, which is funding drone programs, censored versions of the internet in China for Google particularly. I think that does matter too. So it's exit and build is multiple things. It's about physical location sometimes. So say you're in an area that's not conducive to liberty, it might be a better idea to move to Central Texas or move somewhere like that.
That's the whole of the United Kingdom, by the way.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of UK coming to Mexico and elsewhere. So it can mean that physical location, like if you want to move somewhere that you think is going to be more conducive to your principles, but then also in actions, right? So I'm going to exit and build from using Google anymore. Instead, I'm going to look at other alternatives, CRX and Presearch, or I'm going to use LibreWolf, de-Googled browsers. There's all kinds of different alternatives for most of the things we're doing. There's tools that can do sheets and docs and everything that you love that Google does, but there's somebody doing it better that does respect your privacy. And I don't work for any of these companies that I've name dropped, by the way. This is just tools that I personally use. And so I think that's another element to look at, like, just do this whole, what I call like a holistic self-assessment. Like, okay, my technology, I've got, a T-Mobile phone with Google on it and this and that. What steps can I take to get off that? Can I get a de-Googled phone? Do I want to get, a different privacy browser? Do I want to get, go to Linux? There are options that we can take when it comes to our digital privacy and tools. But again, it's a learning curve. It takes time. It takes maybe watching a couple of videos and learning how to get these things. And these aren't going to be the things that you buy on the stock shelf at the store, right? So that, because they've already monopolized that market. So it's going to, when you go to the store, be Google, Apple, Amazon, et cetera. So you have to make a little effort if you want to do this. Again, you'll decide how far you want to go once you start taking these steps. For me, it's important enough to at least know these alternatives exist. I can't claim that I never use Google. A lot of times I use it if I want to search to see what the mainstream is talking about, or at least what the mainstream is being shown. So that's one thing, is looking at your phone, looking at your devices, trying to see how you can reduce the surveillance, because it's all about information flow, right? There's some things that you voluntarily give out. You sign up for an email list, you give your email, it's like low risk, right? Okay, somebody's going to spam you now or whatever, right? Phone number, maybe that's a little more private, right? We can decide like how much information we want to give, but especially the younger generation, we're being sort of pushed into a society where it's all just like being given constantly. And people, for example, flying internationally, as you know, like they're starting to test facial recognition at the airport in the US and elsewhere. It's still optional in the US, but most people don't know this. So I know this. So we don't just step up to the thing because they'll take your picture without asking you. We kind of step off the side and give her a passport. And she's like, step up. And I'm like, no, thank you. And you're allowed to go. But most people don't do that. They've already been conditioned through COVID just to step there. Okay, thank you. They're giving up their face print. They have no idea. Now, the government claims they're only holding that for a week or whatever, right? But who do they sell it to in that time, right? And what companies are holding it? There's companies like Clearview AI that have built the world's largest, what they call, this is our face print or selfie, a face print database, all scoured from open source information like social media, from people just posting. They've collected this largest database and they sell that to cops. They sell it to governments, whoever needs access, because they have a bigger database than the FBI itself now. And there's private companies like that are kind of stepping in that space. So little things like that to me, like in what ways can I, even for example, I use a fake name on Uber. Like whenever I order food from restaurants, I always use fake names. Like I'm just for me, because it's just about exercising privacy, just flexing that muscle a little bit.
Do you use social media at all?
I mean, that's the one area I'm very public.
Yeah, because I was going to say...
Maybe if I had started earlier and rethought that, I might have used a pseudonym, but...
Well, I just think it's a useful tool for you to promote what you're doing.
Of course.
And distribute your content and get out. If you're going to do a tour, it's a useful thing. But I would assume you're probably more Twitter, Instagram, less TikTok.
I have a friend who runs a TikTok account for my website. I don't touch it at all. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I do have an Instagram account that I don't use that much. I'm on most of the mainstream platforms. Over the years, this is the thing, is I've been promoting alternatives even before Nostr since 2015. It was Steam It back then. There was others trying to get people on Odyssey, on all these different video platforms. And I still am in those places. But unfortunately, the masses won't come. Like they want to stay where it's convenient and where it's easy, and that's where my grandma's at. And I got pictures of cats and all the other things I love. Right? I don't want to go to some new platform where none of my friends are. Now I'm there, and the other people who know are there, and I still do posts at these other platforms. But it just seems like the masses want to stay where they are. So even though I've deleted my Facebook account years ago, I was like, all right, I can tell there's a noticeable difference in traffic when I'm not putting stuff there, So I've conceded that to a bit in the interest of spreading the ideas, in a perfect world.
Well, you gotta make some income, right? You need to
exactly. And I get paid for my journalism, whether people read it or not. But obviously, I want to get it out as widely as possible and to get my articles and videos in front of people. So I use social media as that tool. And you mentioned like the tour. The tour wouldn't have been possible without social media. We did these. I don't have a manager. It's just myself and my partner and people say, hey, I follow your work, I'll organize in this city, I'll find a venue. It was totally possible because of social media. So again, I'm not anti-technology. The book's not anti-technology. Hopefully no one's taking that away. It's just about what is our relationship with technology? Where's the line for you? What are you willing to do? And then again, not being dependent on systems that I think can later be used against us. We talking about the economics and talking about the financial side of things. I'm sure this audience is already at this point, largely in part due to Whitney and some other folks, versed in CBDCs and programmable money and the concerns around that. But I also do think food is a big part of it, and I'm not saying everybody needs to be a farmer tomorrow or even have that goal, but having some connection to your local food supply, some awareness of that is, I think, a better position to be, so that as we saw with COVID and as there have been discussions about potential climate lockdowns in the future and things like that, I don't think we're done seeing those particular tools being used against the people. I think they'll come back in different ways. It might not be about a pandemic or anything, but so I'm sort of saying, and as the second edition says, like, okay, if we've seen the games they've played, lockdowns, passport IDs, all that, we would be foolish to not try to develop some kind of idea of, okay, what am I going to do next time? How am I going to make sure I can keep feeding my family without having to take the jab next time if it comes back, or having to do X, Y, and Z, whatever they say, hey, do this and you get your rights back. I want to be in a position to say, fuck you, I'm going to live my life and be free anyways. Because I don't depend on your systems. This isn't easy, but the sooner we start having that dialogue and thinking about these things, I think the better off the most people will be. And maybe some won't want to go this route and will be content with what's easy and what's convenient. But I think in the long term, people will realize that they've given up privacy and liberty for convenience.
How much time are you now spending thinking about AI, both as a part of the problem leading us towards further dystopia, but also as a potential tool for liberty?
Yeah, I see both. I mean, in the book, obviously, like I acknowledge that there's positive side use cases to AI, but I'm focused on like the potential dangers, right? Yeah. But yeah, I have friends.
I'm sorry to stop you there. I'm actually really interested in the idea of how AI can be used for positive.
I'm becoming more interested. I was going to say I have some friends who are involved in AI projects who are, I have a friend, for example, based here in Austin who developed, I think he just kind of took ChatGPT or some fork and then made his own, what he calls the empathy bot. And he trained it on nonviolent communication, compassionate communication, and made it as a tool for people to be able to dialogue with. Like if you're suicidal or going through something, the idea would be like, you actually have somebody to empathize with. Like, I thought that was really cool, right? I get the idea that there's going to be use cases that could be valuable and useful. And hopefully the developers that are libertarian on our side are going to continue to work on these projects because, like my buddy I mentioned who has the privacy phone, he comes from big tech and, he took a huge pay cut to go independent and say, all right, I'm gonna start focusing on privacy tech and doing this instead of working for Google or whoever else, was writing the checks. I think that is an allure that we all face, but definitely folks who are in the AI world, the dev world, there's big money to be made if you go the mainstream route. And if you work for the big tech companies instead of maybe a small team working on a privacy focus, this or that, where you might not be getting as much as you'd like and maybe what you're worth. Hopefully the people who understand these tools, because I'm not a technologist, I can't build anything. I'm just the guy who's like, hey, here's a new cool tool. Let me promote it to people who care about these things and let me try it out and test it out and actually use it. And if we're going to get people to adopt and to work on these new tools, this next stage of society, well, we need the people willing to build it. And
because I do wonder whether we can train AI to make better decisions than politicians, for example. Is there a world whereby, I think at my local level in Bedford, I know a lot of the politicians are useless. I know they've got their own personal interests. I know they're compromised. But if you could agree on a set of principles for how a society should coordinate and should run, could you ask the AI? Could the AI make difficult decisions about how the important decisions about how a society could run, because it isn't compromised. It doesn't need its palms greasing. Is there a way of using AI to can you feed data in and say, okay, the politicians saying we should do this. The data and AI, based on the principle of a cohesive society, says we should do this.
I think if you don't take the human out of that equation, then there could be some potential. Like, for example, so say you had something to what you were just saying. You got your politicians on local level, and there's some AI that has somehow been approved by the people. Like, everybody agrees, this is the data set it's going to train on. These are the values and the principles. It knows this is as far as it can go. It can't violate citizens' rights, whatever, things like that. Something that we could all agree on. And there still was a human element. Maybe that would work for some people. Because I do worry about, for example, I mentioned Israel earlier, and I think it's called Lavender, their AI program that they're using to drop bombs. They're not the only one. The US government is working on this. Google has the Dragonfly program.
So fucked up, man.
So you take the human, we already got guys sitting in Utah playing little joysticks and drop drone bomb. But you take the human element out of it, which is already pretty humanless and brutal. Or let's imagine there's a cop on the street, right? At least with a cop, you can be like, come on, man, maybe appeal to his humanity, don't beat me down, etc. But if that's a robot dog with
Ed
AI,
209, have you seen RoboCop?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, when Ed 209 goes fucking crazy.
This is what I'm saying. So I worry about that, the human element being taken out of it. But maybe there is a balance somewhere. But then maybe eventually people would be like, all right, well, we keep siding with the AI, so let's just go with that eventually. I don't know, but I just worry about that if we take the humanity out of our relationships and it's just well, look, the AI said, one other example, talking about me living this lifestyle and some of the difficulties. We're traveling, we go to the airport. Neither one of her phone doesn't do the QR code thing. It just doesn't scan it. And I have cash. So I go to a restaurant, there's food, there's a human being right there. She's got silverware and stuff. And I say, can I buy you? Yeah. She's like, I can't take cash. I'm like, well, there's that equation I'm trying to figure out. And then she's like, yeah, you have to scan the QR code to get the menu to be able to order. I said, but I can see the food in the menu right there. Can I just tell you what I want? And just that sort of silly situation. But at the same time, that is going to get more difficult for people like myself who aren't necessarily in those systems. That's just now. Imagine as these things get more built out. And again, the humanity's gone. She's sorry, the computer says no. The computer says no, you're unscannable. Sorry, I can't. I just worry about that not that the technology doesn't have a role, of course, but there should still be some human safeguards in these systems is what I would think would be maybe a balance there. And maybe that's not possible. Who knows?
Well, this is what I keep thinking about, this AI counter-revolution. Still we've got to have humans and human decisions, but if AGI means we have this supercomputer that can know everything and make really intelligent, smart decisions, can we demonstrably prove that certain politicians are making really bad decisions that are net bad for society? Can we do that? Can we use that as, because we've got to the point now where, historically, I don't know how old you are, but pre-internet, the world was very different, right? Yeah. We kind of got the news once a day. And, they were probably fucking lying to us, but we kind of put up with it. Everyone got on with their lives. But society hasn't caught up with the idea of all information being accessible everywhere.
Sure.
And if you're bullshitting, you're called out. A politician, Elizabeth Warren gets community noted on Twitter all the time just for fucking lying. So we're at the moment now where we can prove their lies and prove their lies in public. And do you know what? That's making a difference. We saw that with the vote in Congress this week, where essentially 71 Dems, sided against the Democrat Party, what they wanted to do, the veto on SAB 121. I might have got some of this wrong, but the point being is that the politicians are seeing now they can't really get away with lying.
Sure.
Because people don't take it anymore, and we can expose them for it. But is it one step further now that beyond lying, we can actually prove the decisions they're making are bad?
I think there's definitely possibilities for that, and I agree with you in terms of I've said for years, we're in a digital arms race. I mean, they're going to build tools to spy, and somebody's building something to block it, and to get around it. And they're trying to come after Bitcoiners, and somebody's trying to build layer 2. I mean, we're just like, I just think we're at that point. So they got their AI, and they're going to use it for whatever reasons they can, and connect it to facial recognition. And surely there are people working on the opposite of that. And those are what I'm saying when I say like exit and build or support those who are building, because I can't build those things, but I definitely want those people on my team. And I'm grateful for the cypherpunks and those out there who are really trying to use these tools in that way. And in terms of keep holding them accountable, yeah, we can call out their lies faster. I think probably one of the biggest roadblocks that we face as free people and free thinkers is the control of the corporate media. Now, of course, podcasts have like really started to outpass.
Even that's dying, man.
I mean, I see they're dying, but there's still this sort of, like, if we were to like in a rough population, say you got 100 people here, maybe there's going to be 30%, I don't know what number people say, that are paying attention to things like this, have varying opinions, but they're paying attention and they see through government lies and they're getting more of their information from podcasts or social media. And then there's others who are maybe kind of still just middle of the road people that are just going about their lives working like the average person. And then there's those who are like the hardcore, the other end, who buy everything that, the corporate media says. They got 9 boosters at this point, they're just totally bought in. I feel like we're vying for that middle America, the people who are, still not really pushing one way or the other. They can be sort of woken up or whatever you want to say, but there are still people who have that trust, maybe not a deep trust, but they look to the TV at night. Like I consider my family to be this average working class people, working 6 days a week, got kids to take care of. They're not activists. They're not listening to 4-hour podcasts or 3-hour podcasts. They see what is the nightly news telling them, that sort of thing. Not deeply, but that's where they might get their most information. Yeah, but those people are accessible still. They're not like, they're not diehard bought in. And I think that we are in the middle of that shift, like we're seeing, or the early stages of that shift for sure. And AI could be a role, it could be part of that shift.
But I think it's a generational thing, because the thing I would say to you, which audience is growing and which is shrinking?
Sure, yeah.
Like our 30% is growing, their 30% is shrinking. And it's a generational thing. Like my kids don't watch the news.
Yeah, there's nobody watching Fox News that other than just to check what's going on in that world, that are probably under 50 or maybe even older, right? It's definitely, and other news as well. Like, yeah, for sure, they're getting their information from TikTok, from Instagram, elsewhere, for better or worse.
I think it's a generational thing. I think with the trajectory is right, and they're getting away with their lies less, and also they're being demonetized. Yep. Like, how many of these big news organizations are struggling?
Oh, they're firing people left and right. I mean,
know.
They're trying to, and even I think it was just this week, just a couple of days, it was either Associated Press or the Washington Post actually related to AI announced that they're now about to embrace AI, and they fired a bunch of their journalists. They didn't get rid of all of them, but they're basically, this is again, one of the kind of worrisome things that for somebody like me, if Grok can just summarize the news for everybody, then will people read articles anymore? Or will they just trust the AI, that the AI gave them the right thing? That's like, to me, the sort of balance, right? Like, because we shouldn't just trust the Google search, the first page, that we're getting the truth. And I would hate to get to a point where people are talking to their digital assistants, Echo, whatever, Alexa, and saying, tell me the truth about COVID. And if the AI says it, well, then it must be true, right? Like, we don't want to get to that point. We still want to have our critical thinking and,
But I think that tool will, but I think I understand your concern, but what I think is going to happen is, like, if the big media companies embrace AI, what they're doing is they're replacing humans with AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're going to have AI generate articles, right? They're going to be like, write an article on XYZ, and someone's going to proofread it, and that person's going to be able to generate 5 articles when they normally do 1 because the AI is writing them. But there's no authenticity into it, and it's just their own managed decline until they go defunct.
They're gone. Yeah.
Whereas the Substacks and the podcasts are growing. Yep. I think people will still report them. But what will happen is the people getting fed bullshit by the AI will go, well, I don't trust this, because they will learn they're getting fed by bullshit. Look, it's a transitional period, I believe. But I fundamentally believe we are in a transitionary period. It's a multi-decade one.
Absolutely.
Where it's a good v evil, them v us, elites v the peasants. I fundamentally believe that's happening, but I believe we've got enough in front of us to allow us to win. We've got the technology
I work
on our
for
side.
that every day.
We've got our money. We just need to keep pushing.
Yeah.
But the reason I think we win is because people are becoming more exposed to being lying. I actually agree with Tucker Carlson on this, and I'm not the hugest Tucker Carlson fan, but when he said it's not a battle between left and right anymore. The battle's between the people who tell the truth and the people who lie. That's what it is. And so where are the liars? Well, they're in the media, but they're not all the people in the media. Some people, there's probably some good journalists at the New York Times, Washington Post, who are going to quit. They're going to do their own Substack, and it's going to be great.
Go independent.
Exactly. And there's good people, I think, within politics who are going to do something different. But we're going to expose the liars. We're just going to expose them because they can't hide from their lies anymore because everything's provable. And I think the AI will prove their lies more.
I hope that it does play a role. I mean, I agree with you 100% on what you said. For one, like, I think this is a generational battle that we're in here. I don't think we're going to see the changes necessarily tomorrow. Maybe not even, I mean, we'll see how quickly things change, right? We're in some pretty rapid times and a very crucial time in humanity's history. We both have states and governments that have more access to technology than history ever has given them. And we have access to, as you said, these tools as well. So we're in a unique moment. I do think we win in the long term. I do think that generationally, there's going to be more liberty for the coming people here. I also think we're facing some potentially tough times, and it's just about making it through that, keeping these ideas alive, working on the technology that could potentially free us, and building something new. I mean, but I do have faith that we're going to get there. I also see, like you were saying, like with podcasts, like I see growth in my own work, obviously your work, and so many other people are reaching millions of people around the world that are looking for new solutions. And if we continue on that trend while also maintaining our critical thinking, because one of the things I think people make mistakes of assuming that, like you're saying, not all journalists in the mainstream are liars or bad. Like there's just a sort of, I think, a blanket approach of like anything that comes out of the mainstream media is lies. That's not really how they operate. They mix truth with lies. But you share an article that could just be about a basic fact from CNN or whatever, and like, oh, that I'm not even bothering reading it. It must be lies. But then they'll believe anything that comes out of alternative independent media.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to maintain that critical thinking. There are people in the independent media who get shit wrong all the time.
Dude,
people are scammers, people are liars.
It's audience capture is a drug.
Or people who realize like, look, if I talk about these particular topics, I get make more money. I get a lot more views. So I'm going to just play that up. Principles be damned, truth be damned sometimes. And you feed that into the audience. And so we do have... And the internet has created silos in some cases. We got this beautiful decentralization, but sometimes people, and I see this a lot with Trump supporters and really all political people who have their heroes, that they're in the bubble, and anything outside of that, I'm not going to look at that. Oh, that's a conspiracy website. Oh, that's a crazy podcast. Oh, I'm not, just anything to keep them in that cognitive dissonance starts coming in. I got to keep myself safe and not look at anything outside of my worldview. I worry that still happens, but I do think in the longer trend, liberty wins, freedom wins, truth wins, and it's going to be through things like Bitcoin. It's going to be hopefully by building alternative systems. I don't think it'll be politics. It might play a role. There might be people like Massey and others who help keep those ideas in that mainstream area. But like you said with the newspapers, I think that we could get to a point where the political institutions do die off, and whatever they are, they look much different than what we're used to right now, especially in the United States. I mean, that's like the best case scenario.
Amen.
So part of my journalism is this 17-part documentary series that I'm so close to finishing, and I would love for people to check that out. They can see it at thepyramidofpower.net. And this is basically a project I started originally in 2018 when I was doing those tours. I was giving a 2.5-hour presentation called The Pyramid of Power. And then I realized like there's got to be a better way to get all this information out instead of expecting people to sit there for 2.5 hours while I go super deep. But the idea evolved from there into this 17-part documentary series where I essentially look at the different pieces of this kind of ruling class system, starting with the education system, the corporate media, just different areas, the prison system, and kind of steadily building up our way to the top of this pyramid and getting potentially more what some might label conspiratorial. But the great thing about this and all my work is all the facts are there. Every episode has a transcript with all my sources. And what I tried to do with this was to make it bingeable for the Netflix generation. So every episode aims to be 30 minutes or less.
Love it.
We've succeeded on that in the vast majority of them, except for the intelligence one, because there's just a lot to say there.
Yeah.
We talk about the MI6, the US, the Russian, Chinese, et cetera. But most episodes, we just released the 14th one 2 weeks ago called The False Flag Deception. And we have 3 more left. The final episode is going to answer the question, who or what is at the top. And I've interviewed Whitney Webb, I've interviewed G. Edward Griffin, like so many different really, really powerful and educated researchers in different areas, these different topics. The whole thing is available for free at thepyramidofpower.net and at my website, theconsciousresistance.com. And the idea is to give people like I didn't want to recreate the wheel for every single topic. Like there's some people who've already written the book on the Fed or whatever. Well, let me source that. And then each episode ends with, hey, if you want to learn more, here's some books to check out. Here's some documentaries to check out. And I think most importantly, every episode ends with solutions. Like like we talked about today. Okay, we're talking about big tech. Well, here's some solutions that you might want to consider or look at. And try to cram all that in, the history, the facts, the solutions, and then further reading and watching all in 30 minutes or less. And the idea is once it's done, we're going to sell USB drives and just get this out as far and wide, and maybe DVDs for anybody who still has DVD player. And and so it's just a project I've been working on for 3 years now, like with the production process, and it's all completely crowdsourced as well, because of my supporters just totally helping make it happen. And I think that's going to be in the long term one of the more important things that I've been doing. So
that sounds like the entertainment for my flight home. Yeah,
check it out, man. I mean, I think you'll enjoy it. There's a lot of familiar faces in there, and as I said, most important solutions, because my role is really journalist, activist, trying to promote and highlight solutions, try to educate, and also like this is not a hobby. This is the way I live my life on a daily basis. These are the things I work on every day, whether that's writing an article, coming here to talk to people like you, giving speeches, organizing my own events as well. I host an event down in Mexico and in the UK. I was telling you, it's called the Greater Reset. Now we call it the People's Reset. It was actually launched as a response to the World Economic Forum Great Reset announcement. We meet every January for 5 days, just like them, but we talk about solutions from the bottom up: mental, physical, spiritual health, decentralized technology, parallel systems, how to build community, permaculture, and food. And we bring speakers from all around the world. We put all those talks out for free at thegreaterreset.org on our channel. Put them out in English, put them out in Spanish. Like, this is what I dedicate my time to, is trying to connect with people all around the world and get these ideas as far as wide as possible, because I think that there is the potential for the good that we were talking about, and there is the other potential as well. And so I just have kind of personally trying to dedicate as much time in my life as possible to helping be a part of that generational change that we were talking about.
Well, I'm really glad we met, and I'm really glad we did this. And I think this is probably the first of many times we're going to do this, because I absolutely back everything you're doing. I support you. Any way we can help, you let us know. Hopefully we'll get quite a few people listen to this and buy your book and watch your videos and reach out to you. And there's a few people you need to meet. You definitely need to meet Matt Odell.
Yeah, connect me.
Do you know Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation?
Yeah, I do. I haven't met him, but I know who he is.
Again, that's somebody else you need to meet and talk to. And I think there's a bunch of people in the Bitcoin world who are going to appreciate your work, you're going to align with. Cool. And I think there are a bunch of them probably going to want you on their podcasts and come to the events. Yeah, you should come to Nashville in July if you can. That would be very cool. I mean, do you know what would be really cool is sit down with you and Whitney together. I think that would be fucking awesome.
Whitney and I have not connected in person. We've worked together a lot online, of course, and I've written for her site and for Last American Vagabond, but we have not met in person yet. So Let's
make that one happen. And you're in the UK. When do you say September?
We'll be in September.
I need to put that in my diary.
Yeah, the Greater Reset, the People's Reset UK, September 27th to the 29th. We just announced about a week and a half ago, and it's going to be a great time. It's in Bath. And
all right.
Really excited to bring the idea out there. I was actually working with this activist based in the UK. Maybe you've come across him. His name is Dan Aston Gregory. He's really active during COVID, and we brought him to Mexico for our event this year, and he really just fell in love and said, all right, bring this to the UK. I'll help you guys make it happen.
What's his name?
Dan Aston Gregory. Yeah, he's a really passionate activist as well out there, and he's also into Bitcoin too.
So what will you be doing on the Friday
of
the 27th? Will something be going on?
So Friday, so it's going to be all weekend. Usually it's 5 days, but this time it's going to be 3 days. So we're going to be going over those same things I mentioned. There's going to be speakers talking about, I don't know what the exact schedule is at this point, but all those topics I mentioned. So decentralization and food and money and technology, how to get ourselves mentally, physically, spiritually prepared, and just how to build something better.
Dude, it's in my diary. I'm going to come. The Saturday I might not be able to come because I've probably got a football match for my team.
Friday, we'd love to have you.
I'll come Friday and hang out.
To come check out a game too.
You should definitely come and check out a game. But yeah, listen, just stay in touch. Reach out to me, reach out to Danny. Anything you need, let us know. I'm going to connect you with a couple of people. And yeah, really great to meet you. I've loved this. Man, yeah, great to meet you, man.
Great to meet you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. Go check out Derrick's book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. And what was the video site with the documentaries?
Thepyramidofpower.net.
Go and check that out. See you all soon.